Well, hello everybody and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta. Oh, shoot. I'm going to get into an accident here. And that was a little bit of country music for you, a little Jack Owen. I was Jack and you were Diane, I believe it's called. And nothing but the best for you guys here on Consistent Preterism. All right? Crappy radio intro music with static going on in the background. Like I said, folks, this is a major professional production that we have going on here, and I do appreciate all of your support. Folks, I gotta ask you a question. It's a serious one. If you are a Christian today, I need to ask you a question. The question is pretty simple. Here it is. Are you a descendant of Abraham? Seriously, that's the question. Did you descend from Abraham? Did you come from Abraham's loins? I really got to know that, because that's actually the entire story in a nutshell, folks. The entire gospel mission was for Abraham's seed. The promise would be sure to all the seed. And here's the funny thing that a lot of people aren't realizing when they read this Bible and they do some wackadoodle spiritual Israelite nonsense. The word seed is the same as the word descendant. Okay, now, I don't know about you guys, but here on planet Earth, the word descendant means from the old nutsack. Okay, to just put it bluntly. Sorry to everyone who might take offense to that, but that's what descendant means. Okay, you descended from Abraham. All right, so I go back to the original question. Are you a descendant of Abraham? And if you say yes, spiritually, you're a banana head. All right? You're a banana head. The story has absolutely nothing to do with spiritually descending or being a spiritual descendant of Abraham. That's something that was invented and made up by a bunch of idiots who had no clue what they were doing in between the covers of this book we call the Bible. Okay? Because the story's actually a lot tighter than that. The story's actually a lot better than that. I mean, what kind of story? Oh, you turn into a spiritual Israelite? I mean, that's the best you could do? No. The story is a full circle, full trajectory finishing, foundation honoring narrative that involves literal descendants of Abraham. Okay, now you might be saying, well, Paul said this and Paul said that and Paul said this, right? And I just backhand that into oblivion. Okay, what we're going to do today quickly as I cruise down the avenue here is we're going to look at Romans chapter 4, and I want you guys to pick up on just how powerful this is. Okay, because the answer is literally right here. It's right freaking here, folks. It doesn't get any more simple or any simpler than this. Okay? Paul is going through Abraham and how he was justified, and the first passage or the first verse in Romans 4 says, "What then shall we say that Abraham our father has found according to the law?" And so right away we see this question of Paul that says, what did Abraham our father find? Now, I know. If you're a Christian, you look at that and you say, Abraham's my daddy. Abraham's my daddy by faith. But I'm here to tell you something, folks. I'm here to break you from that nonsense. Okay? Abraham is not your daddy. All right? Who's your daddy? I'm your daddy. Okay? Abraham is not your daddy. Okay? Likewise, when we look at passages like 1 Corinthians 10, I think it's verse 1, somewhere in that area, where Paul is writing to the Corinthians and he says, all of our fathers passed through the Red Sea and were baptized into Moses. Those are not your fathers, people. I hate to break it to you. All right? It looks like a lot of people have a daddy complex out there. They just want daddies. Okay? Those are not your fathers. Those are the fathers of Israel. Okay? And what I'm about to show you is going to prove that anyone who argues against that is a flippin' banana head, all right? Try to keep it PG here with cuss words like banana head and wackadoodle sandwich, all right? Because Romans chapter 4 and what Paul says there towards the end, towards the second half, is so incredibly telling, it's so incredibly powerful, that one would be an idiot to argue against it. We're going to pick up in verse 16 and we're going to read through 22, okay? And I mean, folks, really, how can anyone argue against this? I'm sure I'll have someone like Abagana de Derail, I think that's his name or her name, whatever it is on YouTube. This person argues with me that Paul had a conspiracy in mind. Paul wasn't looking for Israelites. Paul wasn't looking for descendants. Paul, by the power of the Holy Spirit, wasn't looking for the seed of Abraham, the descendants of Abraham. He was just kind of going around doing his own thing. You hit him with a bunch of proof texts showing him how that's not true, and he comes back and says, yeah, but this, that, and the other, right? Typical arguments, just nonsense, okay? But look at what Paul freaking says in Romans chapter 4, okay? Verse 16 says this, therefore, it is of faith. Now, he's talking about the promise, right? Because remember, he asks, is Abraham our father? What did he find according to the law? It wasn't the law that justified him. It was the faith, his faith, right? Because you have these Jews who are kind of like attaching and clinging to the law and saying, hey, we abide by the law. This promise is ours. We're the chosen ones, right? The high-minded Jews. And Paul is kind of like shooting that down, saying, hey, it's not about the law. The promise was given before that, right? The promise was through faith. And this is where people go wrong. They think, see, that's what it says. It's through faith. But yes, it is through faith, but it still doesn't extend beyond the seed. Now, let me show you what I mean, okay? It says, therefore, it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise might be sure to all the seed. Not only to those who are of the law, hold on, a lot of freaking traffic and construction here, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. So first of all, it says that the promise had to be sure, or actually some translations use certain instead of sure. So the promise had to be certain to all the seed. Plural, all the seed, folks. So just a little side note, if anyone tries to use Galatians and Jesus being the seed singular as a reason why you should object IO, you should backhand them. Give them a cyber backhand, because clearly there's a plural seed involved. And the promise was going to be sure to all of the seed, says Paul. Okay? Notice he goes on, he says, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. So, again, what is he saying? What does he mean when he says who is the father of us all? My view would say that Paul is simply saying that it doesn't matter if you're Jew or Greek. It doesn't matter if you're slave or free. It doesn't matter if you're abiding by the law or out in the nations living as a pagan. If you are Christ's, it's because you're Abraham's descendant and an heir according to the promise. See, that's my view, okay? And I'm going to prove that that's exactly what Paul means here, okay? So he goes on, he says, who is the father of us all? Then he says, as it is written, I have made you a father of many nations in the presence of him who believes. So what does that mean? I have made you the father of many nations. Now, again, people would say, see, it means, people can become Abraham's descendant by faith, right? As if becoming Abraham's descendant is like some kind of prize, right? That's what everybody's going for. Why don't they just call it Abrahaminity instead of Christianity? Because it seems like to these bonkerdoodle whack jobs, the goal is actually to become Abraham's descendant or Abraham's seed instead of becoming one of Christ. Because they're taking passages like Galatians 3 and they're saying, look, it says, if you're Christ, then you're Abraham's seed. So they're saying, if you believe in Christ, you become Abraham's seed. How stupid is that? How stupid is that? Do you folks want to become Abraham's seed? Is that what you're going for in your Christian walk? No. Okay, so it's bass backwards, as always. what Paul is saying there is if you're Christ, it's because you're an heir. Hello, this is the mystery. Okay, you're an heir according to the promise. And you're receiving that promise right now, which is the Holy Spirit, the marking out of the 12 tribes. So he goes on after he says, I have made you a father of many nations. Well, let's talk about that for a second. What does that actually mean? Well, in the beginning in Genesis, when God sets forth the promise to Abraham, he tells him that he would be the father of many nations. And he says a lot about that. But if you notice the language used in Genesis, go back there and read Genesis 12, Genesis 15, Genesis 17. It's all about descendants, right? Descendants. Now, if you've read any of the Old Testament, you know that it's super descendant heavy. It's all about lineage. It's all about descending from. And this one begot this one. And this one begot that one. And that one begot that one. And this one boinked that one. And that one boinked that one. And this one took one into his tent. And what is the word they use? There's a saying that we used to laugh at when I was a youngster. And he knew her. He knew her, right? He took her into his tent and he knew her. That means they got it on, man. They got it on. All right? And so, if you understand how heavy the Old Testament is in descendant language, you wouldn't take any other understanding of the word descendant, because it clearly means from the nutsack, from the loins. Okay, it actually says it in the promise to Abraham, that your heir will come from your loins. It'll come from your own body. I mean, it doesn't get any clearer than this. All right, so keep that in mind here as we go through the rest of this passage in Romans 4. He goes on, he says, God, who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did, who, contrary to hope, in hope believed, so that he became the father of many nations. Ready? Here it is. According to what was spoken, quote, so shall your descendants be, end quote. Now, folks, I don't know if you picked up on what I just put down, but let me explain to you what that just was, okay? That was Paul wrapping up everything he just said in Romans 4, Romans 3, Romans 2, Romans 1. He was wrapping it all up in a crystal clear ball, okay? He put a bow on it. He took a little silver platter. He handed it to you so you could understand what the hell he was saying. But Paul just dropped the hammer on all you spiritual Israelites out there, okay? And you're saying, oh, I don't believe that. How did he do that? That doesn't make any sense. I'll show you how. Okay, let's read it all in flowing context so you can pick it up. We'll start in verse 16 again. Therefore, it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise will be certain to all the seed, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. God, who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did, who, contrary in hope believed, so that he became the father of many nations, according to what was spoken, quote, so shall your descendants be, end quote. Folks, Paul is so freaking clear here. Paul is saying that Abraham becoming the father of many nations was directly tied to his descendants being out there. Okay? That's exactly what Paul is saying here. He quotes the promise. He says, according to what was spoken, quote, so shall your descendants be, end quote. And then he goes on, he talks about Sarah's womb and how it was barren or whatever, and then God, through their faith, gave them the promise, and he performed it. But the point here, folks, that you need to pick up on is that Paul actually just gave away the goose. He gave away the answer to everybody. So shall your descendants be. So shall your descendants be. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. And people will actually argue with me and other IOers that Romans 4:1 and 1 Corinthians 10 is not about literal descendants or literal fathers. It's about, spiritual stuff. What did our spiritual father Abraham find according to the law? It's nonsense. So shall your descendants be. Descendants, folks. The word descendant never, ever, 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 ever means spiritual descendant by faith. Ever. Abraham's descendants were promised to become a fullness of nations. Just look at the promise to Jacob's son and Ephraim and Manasseh. Just look at it. Ephraim would become a multitude or a fullness of nations. Okay? Here's Paul rallying them in and saying that the promise isn't just to those of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, because he's pulling the seed, he's pulling the descendants out from both parties. The law meant really nothing, is what Paul is saying. Paul is saying, look, the promise was to the seed. It was to Abraham's descendants. It was to Israel. So it doesn't matter if you're Jew or Greek. It doesn't matter about the law right now, right? The promise is through faith so that it would be certain to all the seed. Not only to those who are of the law, not only to the seed, not only to Israel who is abiding by the law today, not only to the elect who are abiding by the law today, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. So not only to the elect who are abiding and living under the law today, but also to the elect who have the faith of our father Abraham and aren't abiding by the law. Okay? But the point that I really, really want to drive home today, folks, is quite simple. It's that if you look at Romans chapter 4, verse 18, you can see the entire gospel mission wrapped up in a nutshell. I mean, the entire gospel mission is right there in Romans chapter 4, verse 18. Paul says, who, contrary to hope, in hope believed, so that he became the father of many nations, according to what was spoken, so shall your descendants be. So Abraham was the father of many nations, quite simply, folks, because his descendants had been pushed there. His descendants had become a fullness of nations. I mean, that's quite clear because that's the actual promise in the Old Testament. That's what they would be. Right? So you have all these arguments. Oh, 1 Corinthians 10 is about the mixed multitude. That's why Paul said all of our fathers passed through the Red Sea. Nonsense. These are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, you might say, oh, that doesn't make sense. How could that be possible? Right? This is the argument of Myth Vision and other guys. That doesn't make sense. How could that be possible? Right? You're telling me that Israelites were living in the nations? That true descendants were kept pure and holy? Yes. Now, I'm not saying that's possible because you guys are all hypocrites. Anyone who argues against IO as being impossible or the Israelites existing in the nations and that's what Paul is doing, that's impossible. Anybody who says that's impossible is a banana head. You're a hypocritical, contradictory banana head because you never question how anything else is possible, right? You never say, well, how the hell can someone walk on water? How the hell can bodies raise from the dead? How the hell can a man ascend to heaven in an angelic body in the end, like Jesus? You never ask about these things, right? All of that's okay. You just accept it at face value as being myth or bullshit or whatever it is you want to call it. But you cannot, for the life of you, accept that this is what the story is saying in regards to those who are being called back and those who are being gathered in. You just can't do it, right? Because you're hypocritical, right? You're contradictory. You're not making any sense. If you're going to say, wow, that can't be. That's impossible. You're telling me Israelites were living in the nations? Abraham's literal descendants were a fullness of nations in that time that Paul was fulfilling this? You're arguing against that because it's impossible, yet you ignore all the supernatural aspects of the story, folks. You can't do one without the other. The story is chock full of supernatural content. Content that makes you go, Content that makes you scratch your head and say, there's no way that happened, right? There's no way a man ascended to heaven. There's no way a man walked on water. There's no way a man healed the blind or raised the dead or whatever else he did, right? Bodies popping out of graves in Matthew 27. All that stuff's super, super silly, right? We don't believe that. But then when it comes to the Who, as I like to call it, the Who, not the band, but the Who, being Israel, right? Oh no, we can't accept that because that doesn't make sense, right? That's a little too far supernatural for us to accept, Jason. Give me a break, you bonehead. All right? You bonehead. The whole story is supernatural. The whole story contains things that doesn't make sense to the normal human brain. And so you cannot have one without the other. That's why IO is the best view out there and always will be. And for those of you who say, well, he couldn't have left them out there. They couldn't have been out there, blah, blah, blah. Well, two things to that. Well, there's a lot of things I could say about that. But number one, if you didn't listen to the Myth Vision interview with the Jewish professor who specializes in the 10 northern kingdoms and the lost tribes of Israel, you should. It was posted about a week ago. You should go take a look at it. And obviously this is information that we all knew here at IO headquarters because we're telling you that that's what the New Testament is about. It's about the 10 northern tribes being brought back. But this professor, if you want somebody with credentials that doesn't just drive around in a Hemi truck with freaking empty water bottles rolling around, if you want somebody a little better than me, go to this professor and hear what he has to say. And what he'll tell you in that interview is that, yes, people actually did believe that the lost tribes, the 10 northern tribes, were existing in the nations, pure, untouched, unblemished, and God would bring them back eventually and have mercy on them. They were going to come back. That was the belief. Add to that, we see many, many places in Scripture, both old and new, that says God would preserve them. There's plenty of places in the Old Testament that talks about God preserving Israel while she's in the nations, God bringing Israel back from those nations, God restoring Israel and bringing the two houses back together. There's so much in the Old Testament, and there's so much in the New. Just look at Paul in Romans 9 and ask yourself why none of these guys ever quote Paul in Romans 9, verse approximately 25, somewhere in that area, 26. When Paul's asking about the mercy that's coming upon the Gentiles, he quotes a passage that says, unless the Lord had left us a seed, we would have become like Sodom. So what is Paul saying there? He's telling you that there's a seed of the true Israel. There's a seed of them existing still in the nations. And again, it's not about what's true. It's not about what seems plausible. It's not about what seems possible or accurate or likely or the likelihood. This is a supernatural tale from front to back. So if a man can walk on water, heal the blind, ascend to heaven, raise the dead, then why the hell couldn't these chosen ones, these ones who are called the elect, why couldn't they be the true descendants? Anything is possible in the land of make-believe, folks. Remember that. Anything is possible in the land of make-believe. So, once again, wrapping it up, putting a little bow on it, shoving it up all the haters' buttholes. Here it is, folks. Verse 16 of Romans 4. Therefore, it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise will be certain to all the seed. Not only to the seed of those who are under the law, but also to the seed of those who are of the faith of Abraham. Notice how I added a little of my paraphrasing in there because it helps, right? It helps you understand what Paul is doing. Just look a couple verses earlier in Romans 4, verse 13. It says, for the promise that he would be heir of the world wasn't to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. So people read that and they're like, look, it's all about faith. But if you actually just add in a couple of words to that, it helps keep it in its proper context. Ready? I'll do it right now. For the promise that he would be heir of the world wasn't to Abraham or to his seed through the law. So that could say it wasn't to Abraham and his descendants through the law, but it was to Abraham and his descendants through righteousness of faith. It's still to his descendants. It doesn't extend beyond his descendants. It was through faith, yes, but only to his descendants. That's just as simple as it gets. So verse 17 or verse 16, therefore it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise will be certain to all the seed, all the descendants, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations in the presence of him who believed, God who gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did, who contrary to hope and hope believed, so that he became the father of many nations according to what was spoken, quote, so shall your descendants be, end quote. Folks, Paul's entire purpose, Paul's entire ministry, Paul's entire goal was all Israel saved. The best thing you can do is stop understanding the word seed as spiritual seed and understand it for what it is, and that's straight from the old nutsack, straight from the loins, descendant. Just throw out every time you see the word seed and use the word descendant. And you'll be a lot better off, I'm telling you right now. The case is closed, folks. There are no arguments. Paul was seeking descendants. I hope you all have a great day, everybody. Give this a like-a-rooski if you enjoyed it. It helps share it. It helps other people get eyes on it. We'll catch you on that flippity-floppity. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.